Ethan, catch me if you can! Lily, stop running! You might fall and get yourself injured!
There are men who spend their whole lives building everything the world told them would make them complete, only to discover, years later, that the one thing they lost as a child was the only thing they were ever truly searching for. Ethan Cole had money, power, private jets, locked boardrooms, and his name printed on buildings in cities where nobody knew the boy he used to be. But on one quiet evening, almost 30 years after he vanished from the neighborhood that raised him, Ethan stepped out of a black car and walked toward an old oak tree with tears already forming in his eyes. Because carved into that tree was not just a name, it was a promise, and beneath that promise were 5 words that almost made him fall to his knees. I waited until the sun set. For most of his adult life, Ethan Cole was known as a man who never looked back. Business magazines called him disciplined. Investors called him brilliant. Competitors called him impossible to break. But none of them knew the truth. None of them knew that every decision he made, every company he built, every risk he took, and every room he conquered came from a wound he had never spoken about. Ethan was not chasing wealth because he loved money. He was chasing enough power to return to a promise he had made when he was 12 years old, a promise made under an oak tree beside a girl named Lily Harper, the only person who had known him before grief changed his voice, before loss hardened his heart, and before one terrible night took his parents away forever. This is the story of a boy who disappeared without saying goodbye, a girl who waited until the light left the sky, and a promise that survived longer than anyone believed it could. It begins in a quiet American neighborhood where 2 families lived side by side, close enough to borrow sugar, share Sunday meals, and leave their doors unlocked on summer afternoons. The Coles were not rich, but they were comfortable. The Harpers were not poor, but they knew how to stretch every dollar. Between their 2 homes stood an oak tree so large that its branches seemed to hold the whole street together. Children played beneath it. Parents rested in its shade. And for Ethan Cole and Lily Harper, that tree became the place where childhood turned into memory. Ethan was the kind of boy adults described as serious, even before life gave him a reason to be. He noticed things other children missed. He remembered what people said. He held doors open, carried groceries without being asked, and listened more than he spoke. Lily Harper was different. She was bright, fearless, and full of small storms. She ran faster than the boys, climbed higher than anyone expected, and spoke with the confidence of a child who believed the world would always make room for her. If Ethan was careful, Lily was courage. If Ethan held back, Lily pulled him forward. And somehow, under that oak tree, 2 children who seemed completely different became inseparable in the way only childhood friends can be. Their parents noticed it before Ethan and Lily understood it. Ethan's mother would smile from the porch while Lily dragged him into another game. Lily's father would laugh and say, "That boy is the only one patient enough for her." Every afternoon, after school and chores, they met under the oak tree. Sometimes they played house. Sometimes they pretended the tree was a castle, a ship, a courtroom, or a secret base no adult was allowed to enter. Lily would make the rules. Ethan would quietly improve them. They buried bottle caps like treasure, tied ribbons to branches, and once made a map of the entire neighborhood with the oak tree drawn in the center, like it was the capital of their world. But every childhood has one day that stays. For Ethan and Lily, it came near the end of summer, when the air was warm, the grass was dry, and the sun was lowering behind the rooftops. They were sitting under the oak tree after a long afternoon of playing. Lily had been talking about the future the way children do, with no fear of bills, funerals, distance, disappointment, or time. She said one day she would live in a white house with yellow curtains, a garden full of flowers, and a porch swing big enough for 2 people. Ethan, who had been carving lines in the dirt with a stick, looked up and said, "I'll build it for you." Lily stared at him for a second, then laughed. She asked him if that meant he was going to marry her. Ethan's face turned red, but he did not laugh. That was one of the things Lily remembered most about him later. Even as a child, when Ethan said something important, he meant it with a seriousness that made the world feel still. He looked at her and said, "Maybe I will." Lily leaned closer and said, "No, not maybe, promise." Ethan looked at the oak tree, then back at her. "Okay," he said, "I promise." Lily made him stand up and place his hand on the tree. Then she placed her hand over his and said that if life ever separated them, they would come back to this tree before sunset. It was a child's promise, but neither of them treated it like a game. Ethan found a small pocket knife his father had allowed him to carry for simple chores, and together they carved their initials into the bark. E+L. The letters were uneven, childish, and too small for anyone to notice unless they already knew where to look. But to Ethan and Lily, those marks felt permanent. Lily said, "When we grow up, we'll come back here and remember this." Ethan said, "I'll never forget." Years later, he would replay that moment so many times that it became sharper than photographs. Her voice, the smell of cut grass, the gold light, the oak bark under his fingers, and the terrible truth that he did not know then. 3 weeks later, Ethan's parents died on a wet road outside town. They had gone to visit a relative and were expected home before dinner. Ethan remembered waiting near the window because his mother had promised to bring back a pie from a bakery she loved. The rain had started softly, tapping against the glass. Then headlights appeared outside, but they were not his parents' headlights. A police car stopped in front of the house. Ethan's mother did not step out. His father did not wave from the driver's seat. Instead, 2 officers walked to the front door, removed their hats, and spoke to the neighbor who had been watching Ethan. That was the night Ethan learned that silence can sometimes say the worst thing before anyone says a word. The neighborhood changed after that. People came with food, flowers, folded cards, and soft voices. Adults whispered in corners and stopped talking when Ethan entered the room. Lily tried to reach him, but there were always people between them. Her mother told her to give him space. Her father told her grief was complicated, but Lily did not want to give Ethan space. She wanted to sit beside him under the oak tree and remind him that he was not alone. At the funeral, she saw him standing between 2 caskets, wearing a suit that looked too big on his small body. His face was still, too still, like a child who had stepped outside himself because staying inside the pain would have broken him. Then Victor Cole arrived. Ethan's uncle came from the city in a dark coat, with a voice that made every sentence sound final. He was Ethan's father's younger brother, and by law and family arrangement, he became responsible for the boy. Some neighbors said Victor was doing the honorable thing. Others said he had never been close to Ethan's parents and seemed more interested in handling matters quickly than gently. Ethan did not understand any of that. He only knew that this man had arrived, packed his clothes, spoke to adults in low tones, and announced that Ethan would be leaving town before the week was over. When Ethan asked if he could say goodbye to Lily, Victor looked at him and said, "You have to stop living like life waits for you." Those words followed Ethan longer than any sermon, any school lesson, or any business advice he ever received. Life does not wait for you. Victor said it like a command, but Ethan heard it like a sentence. On the morning he was taken away, he looked out the window and saw the oak tree standing between the 2 houses. He begged again to say goodbye. Victor refused. He said Lily's family had already been told and that dragging out goodbyes would only make Ethan weaker. But Lily had not been told in time. When she heard the car engine and saw Ethan's suitcase being loaded, she ran out of her house barefoot, her hair loose, her face full of fear. She shouted his name as Victor's car pulled away. Ethan saw her through the rear window. That image became the first ghost of his life. Lily running after the car, one hand lifted, calling for him like her voice could stop the road from taking him. Ethan pressed his palm to the glass. He tried to speak, but his throat closed. He tried to open the door, but Victor locked it. The oak tree passed out of view. The street bent behind them. Lily became smaller, then she disappeared. To everyone else, Ethan Cole left town with his uncle after a family tragedy. To Lily Harper, he vanished without a goodbye. And to Ethan, that car ride became the moment he understood that losing people could happen twice. First, when death took them, and again, when life carried you away from the ones still alive. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Because what happened after Ethan left was not the end of a childhood story. It was the beginning of two separate lives shaped by the same wound. Lily stayed in the neighborhood and waited beneath the oak tree long after everyone told her to stop. Ethan grew up in the city, writing letters that never reached her, building a future that looked successful from the outside but felt unfinished inside. And almost 30 years later, when he finally returned, he discovered that Lily had left him a message in the only place she believed he might someday remember. For Lily Harper, the first days after Ethan left were filled with confusion. Children do not understand adult decisions the way adults do. They do not understand custody, paperwork, grief management, family disputes, or the quiet cruelty of people who think they are protecting someone by cutting them off from the past. Lily understood only one thing. Ethan had promised. He had placed his hand on the oak tree and said he would never forget her. So every afternoon, she went back to that tree and waited. At first, she waited with confidence. She imagined Victor would bring him back after a few days. Then she imagined Ethan would write. Then she imagined he would appear one evening, tired and sad, and tell her he had been trying to come home. But days became weeks, and weeks became months. Lily's older brother, Daniel, teased her at first, then grew annoyed, then worried. He told her Ethan was gone, and that boys forgot promises. Lily told him Ethan was not like other boys. Her mother tried to be gentle. She said Ethan had lost both parents and might need time. Her father, who had always liked Ethan, looked away whenever Lily asked whether the Coles had sent an address. Nobody wanted to tell her the full truth, because nobody knew the full truth. Victor Cole had taken Ethan into a life far removed from their street, and whatever communication should have remained between the families slowly dissolved into silence, missed calls, changed numbers, and the kind of distance that hardens when nobody knows who should cross it first. On the first anniversary of the promise, Lily went to the oak tree before sunset. She wore a blue dress because Ethan had once said blue looked like the sky after rain. She brought 2 sandwiches wrapped in paper, one for her and one for him, because some part of her still believed he would remember. She sat there for hours. Children passed, cars came home from work. Porch lights turned on. The sun moved lower and lower until the street turned orange. Lily kept looking down the road. At the final edge of daylight, she touched the carved initials and whispered, "You promised." When the sun disappeared, she took Ethan's sandwich home untouched. That night, her mother found her crying into her pillow, trying to do it quietly so nobody would call her foolish. In the city, Ethan was learning a different kind of waiting. Victor Cole's apartment was clean, strict, and silent. There were rules for everything. When to wake up, when to eat, when to study, when to speak, and when not to ask questions. Victor believed sorrow was something a person should defeat, not discuss. He told Ethan that his parents were gone, his childhood was over, and the fastest way to survive was to become useful. Ethan obeyed because he had nowhere else to go. But at night, when the apartment was quiet, he wrote letters to Lily Harper. He told her he had not chosen to leave. He told her he saw her running after the car. He told her he remembered the promise. He told her that one day he would come back. The first letter was never mailed because Ethan did not know the full address. He only knew the street, the house color, the oak tree, and the sound of Lily's laugh. The second letter he tried to give to Victor. Victor read the first few lines, folded it once, and asked Ethan if he wanted to spend his life begging the past to return. Ethan said he only wanted Lily to know he had not forgotten. Victor tore the letter in half and said, "People leave, people die, people move on, learn it now." Ethan stood there watching the torn paper fall into the trash, and something inside him changed. He did not stop remembering Lily. He stopped trusting adults with anything that mattered to his heart. From that point on, Ethan hid his letters. He wrote them in notebooks, between school assignments, on the backs of old envelopes, and sometimes in the margins of textbooks. He wrote when he was angry. He wrote when he missed his parents. He wrote when he saw oak trees in city parks and had to look away. He wrote to Lily about the first time he got into a fight at school because another boy joked about orphans. He wrote about the first winter in the city, when snow made the streets look unfamiliar, and he wondered whether the oak tree back home had lost all its leaves. But every letter ended with the same kind of promise. "I'm coming back one day. Please don't think I forgot." Years passed, and the letters became less childish but more painful. Ethan became a teenager with excellent grades and almost no friends. Teachers praised his focus. Victor praised his discipline. Nobody asked what had made him that way. The truth was simple. Ethan had decided that if life could take everything from a person without warning, then he would build a version of himself that life would find harder to move. He studied business before he understood business. He read biographies of wealthy men, not because he admired their luxury, but because he wanted to know how powerless boys became powerful men. Somewhere deep inside him, he believed money could buy distance from helplessness. And maybe, if he earned enough of it, money could also buy the road back to Lily. Meanwhile, Lily's world was changing too. Her father's job became unstable, her mother's health began to fail, and the easy warmth of their home slowly turned into worry. Bills gathered on the kitchen table. Arguments happened behind closed doors. Daniel left for college as soon as he could, promising to help later, though later took longer than anyone hoped. Lily grew into a young woman who smiled often enough to keep people from asking too many questions. She helped her mother, worked after school, and still passed the oak tree every day. She did not wait there every evening anymore, but she never stopped looking at it. The carved initials remained, darker now, stretched slightly by the growth of the bark, as if even the tree had carried the years. By the time Lily was 18, the Harper family had to leave the neighborhood. The house was sold quietly. There was no big goodbye party, no final celebration, no soft ending. Just boxes, dust and rooms, becoming empty one by one. On her last evening there, Lily walked alone to the oak tree. She brought a small metal box with her. Inside were the few things she had kept from childhood. A bracelet Ethan had won for her at a school fair, a photograph of them sitting under the tree, a pressed oak leaf, and a note she had rewritten several times because every version sounded either too angry or too sad. As the sun lowered behind the houses, Lily took a small blade and carved one sentence beneath their initials. "I waited until the sun set." She did not carve it to punish Ethan. She carved it because it was the truth. She had waited as a child. She had waited as a teenager. She had waited through birthdays, summers, Christmas mornings, and quiet evenings when hope felt embarrassing. But now she had to leave, and leaving felt like admitting that the promise had become too heavy for one person to carry alone. She buried the metal box near the roots, covered it with dirt, and pressed her hand against the bark one last time. "If you come back," she whispered, "I hope you understand." Then Lily Harper walked away from the oak tree, not because she had stopped loving Ethan Cole, but because life had finally forced her to keep moving. The new town was smaller, quieter, and less kind to memory. There was no oak tree outside her window, no familiar porch lights, no Ethan running beside her through summer grass. Her mother's illness became the center of the house, and Lily learned early that adulthood does not always arrive with freedom. Sometimes it arrives with medicine schedules, unpaid bills, and the quiet responsibility of becoming strong because everyone else is too tired. She found work wherever she could, first in a diner, then at a small office, then later helping elderly people in their homes. People called her dependable. They called her patient. They never knew patience had been taught to her by waiting for a boy who never came. For Ethan Cole, those same years were measured differently. He was not caring for a sick mother or carrying groceries through a small coastal town. He was in the city, turning himself into someone nobody could dismiss. By 19, he was working before sunrise and studying after midnight. By 22, he had already learned that people respected confidence even when they did not understand pain. He got scholarships, took side jobs, sold small business ideas, failed often, and learned from every failure, like each one was a private instructor. When other young men spent money to prove they were alive, Ethan saved his. When others chased romance, Ethan kept distance. He told himself he had no time for distraction, but the truth was more delicate than that. There was already a name in his heart, and every other name felt like a betrayal. Victor Cole watched Ethan become exactly what he had wanted him to become, or at least that was what he believed. To Victor, the boy had finally stopped asking about the past. He was focused, obedient, ambitious, and useful. But Victor did not understand that silence is not the same as surrender. Ethan had simply learned to hide his memories better. He stopped saying Lily's name out loud, but he still wrote it in private. He stopped asking for the old neighborhood, but sometimes he searched maps in libraries and tried to trace the road back from memory. He stopped crying where anyone could see him, but on the anniversary of his parents' accident, he locked his door and read old letters he had written to a girl who might have already decided he had abandoned her. The first business Ethan started was small and ugly from the outside. It was a repair and resale company built out of a rented storage unit where he bought broken office equipment, fixed what he could, and sold it to small businesses that could not afford new machines. He was not glamorous. He wore the same 2 shirts, skipped meals, slept beside boxes, and answered calls with a confidence he did not always feel. But he understood something many older men in polished offices had forgotten. People did not only buy products, they bought reliability. Ethan became reliable because life had once become unreliable to him. If he promised delivery, he delivered. If he promised a refund, he paid it. If he said he would show up, he showed up, because somewhere inside him was still that 12-year-old boy who knew what it meant when someone waited. By 26, Ethan had made his first serious money. Not billionaire money, not even millionaire money yet, but enough to rent a better apartment, buy his first proper suit, and open a bank account that no longer made him afraid. That year, a woman named Claire entered his life. She was smart, kind, and patient with his distance. They dated for almost a year, and for a while Ethan convinced himself that maybe love was something people could choose with reason. Claire admired him. She understood his ambition. She even asked him once why he never spoke about childhood. Ethan smiled and said there was not much to say. But one evening, while they were walking through a park, Claire pointed to a large oak tree and said it would be a beautiful place for a wedding photo. Ethan stopped walking. Claire noticed his face change. She asked what was wrong. Ethan said nothing. But that night, after dropping her home, he sat in his car for nearly an hour with both hands on the steering wheel. The image of Lily under the oak tree came back with such force that it felt less like memory and more like accusation. He saw her running after Victor's car. He saw her hand lifted. He heard nothing, but he knew she had been calling his name. The next week, Claire asked where their relationship was going. Ethan tried to answer honestly, but honesty sounded cruel. He told her she deserved a man whose heart was fully available. Claire cried, and Ethan hated himself for hurting her. But he also knew the truth. He could lose a good woman and survive it. He could not marry one while still belonging to a promise he had never resolved. Lily also tried to move forward. In her mid-20s, she met a man named Aaron Miller. He was steady, respectful, and loved her in a way that did not demand performance. He worked at a local hardware store, helped her mother with repairs, and made Lily laugh during a season when laughter had become rare. Everyone liked him. Danielle, her brother, said Aaron was the kind of man their father would have trusted. Lily wanted to love him without reservation. She wanted to accept the life being offered to her. A modest home, Sunday church, children maybe, quiet evenings, someone who came back when he said he would. Aaron proposed after 2 years, not with a dramatic speech, but in her mother's kitchen while rain tapped the window. Lily said yes because she was tired of being loyal to a silence. But engagement has a way of asking questions dating can avoid. As the wedding date came closer, Lily found herself dreaming of the oak tree again. Not every night, but enough to trouble her. She began comparing Aaron's hands to Ethan's childhood hands, then feeling ashamed of herself because Aaron had done nothing wrong. One afternoon, while sorting old belongings, she found a copy of the childhood photo she had not buried in the box. In it, Ethan was squinting at the camera while Lily leaned into him, grinning like she already knew life was better beside him. She sat on the floor for a long time, holding that picture. When Aaron arrived, he found her crying. He did not get angry. He simply sat beside her and said, "There is someone you never finished saying goodbye to, isn't there?" That conversation changed everything. Lily told Aaron the story. Not all of it, but enough. She told him about Ethan, the oak tree, the promise, the accident, the sudden departure, and the years she waited. Aaron listened quietly, and that made it worse. If he had shouted, she could have defended herself. If he had accused her, she could have turned pain into anger. But Aaron only looked sad. A few days later, Lily returned the ring. She told him he deserved someone whose first dream had his face in it. Aaron said he loved her enough to let her go, but the loss left both of them wounded. After that, Lily stopped speaking about marriage. People assumed she had become too practical, too busy, too careful. Only Lily knew she had not rejected love. She had rejected pretending. By 30, Ethan Cole was no longer a man struggling to be seen. His second company had grown fast, then merged with a larger firm, giving him the kind of capital most people only read about. He moved into real estate, logistics, and technology services. He was not the loudest man in any room, but he often became the most important. His employees respected him because he remembered names, paid fair wages, and punished dishonesty quickly. Business reporters described his rise as remarkable, but they always missed the emotional engine beneath it. Ethan did not fear hard work. He feared emptiness. He did not fear risk. He feared returning to the old neighborhood with nothing to show for the years he had been gone. In his mind, success had become an apology he hoped would someday be worthy enough for Lily. Yet the more successful Ethan became, the more carefully life hid the thing he wanted. He tried private searches before he ever hired professionals. At first, he searched online for Lily Harper, but there were too many women with that name, too many records, too many states, too many wrong ages. He searched for Daniel Harper and found several possibilities, none certain. He searched old school records, but access was limited. He called a number he believed might belong to someone from the neighborhood, only to learn the family had moved years earlier. Each failed attempt reopened the same wound. What if Lily had married? What if she had died? What if she hated him? What if she had waited for years, and his silence had become the one pain she could never forgive? Then Victor died. It happened when Ethan was 37, a heart attack, sudden and private, inside the same city apartment where Ethan had once learned how lonely a room could be. Ethan arranged the funeral with the efficiency people expected from him. He chose the casket, paid the bills, contacted the few names Victor had kept in his records, and stood beside the grave with a face no one could read. He did not know how to mourn Victor. The man had fed him, housed him, educated him, and protected him in practical ways. But Victor had also severed something sacred. After the burial, Ethan went through Victor's old documents. He expected tax files, property papers, insurance records, and business receipts. He found all of those. But near the bottom of a locked drawer, he found a folder with his father's name on it. Inside the folder were papers connected to Ethan's parents' estate. Some were ordinary, some were confusing. Then Ethan found 3 envelopes addressed to him in handwriting he recognized immediately, even after all those years. Lily Harper. The letters had never reached him. They had been mailed to Victor's apartment when Ethan was 13, 14, and 16. The envelopes had been opened. Ethan sat down slowly, holding them like they were fragile evidence from a life that had almost disappeared. The first letter was full of childish hope. Lily asked if he was okay. She told him she waited under the tree. She said she did not understand why he left without saying goodbye, but she still believed he would write back. Ethan could barely finish reading it. The second letter was different. Lily was older, more hurt, but still gentle. She wrote that she had gone to the tree on the anniversary of their promise. She wrote that she was trying not to be angry. She wrote that if Victor would not let him answer, Ethan should send any sign he could. The third letter was the shortest. It said, "I do not know if you forgot me, or if someone is keeping you from me. I hope it is the second one because I do not want to believe you chose silence. If you ever come back, I will try to understand." Ethan read that line again and again, until the paper blurred. For years he had believed distance and bad luck had kept them apart. Now he knew there had been hands in the middle. Human hands. Victor's hands. That discovery did not bring Ethan peace. It brought fury first, then grief, then a guilt so heavy he could hardly breathe. Victor was dead, so there was nobody to confront, nobody to force into confession, nobody to ask why. Ethan wanted to hate him completely, but grief is rarely that clean. Victor had been cruel in ways he may have considered wise. He had believed cutting Ethan from the past would make him stronger, and perhaps in one narrow way, it had. But what kind of strength comes from denying a child the chance to answer a girl who was waiting under a tree? That night, Ethan took all the letters he had written to Lily over the years and placed them beside the 3 she had sent. For the first time since childhood, their words were in the same room. The next morning, Ethan hired the best private investigator he could find. Her name was Rachel Donovan, a former federal analyst with calm eyes and the kind of voice that made emotion feel organized. Ethan told her only the basic facts at first. Childhood friend, old neighborhood, family moved, possible name Lily Harper, possible brother Daniel Harper. Rachel asked whether this was a legal matter, inheritance matter, or personal matter. Ethan looked at the letters on his desk and said, "It is the only personal matter that ever mattered." Rachel did not ask more than she needed. She began with records, property transfers, school archives, voter registrations, marriage licenses, obituaries, employment traces, and old phone directories. Ethan expected progress to come quickly because money usually moved locked doors. But this time, money met memory, and memory was harder to track. The first report arrived 2 weeks later. Rachel had found the sale record for the Harper family home. She found the father's name, the mother's medical debt filings, and a possible relocation to a county near the coast. She found Daniel Harper, but the trail became complicated because Daniel had used different addresses after college and later moved through several states for work. Lily's records were thinner. There was no clear marriage certificate under Lily Harper in the expected counties. No confirmed death certificate. No major public profile. No obvious social media presence. To Ethan, every absence felt like both hope and punishment. She might be alive. She might be unreachable. She might be living quietly under another name. Or she might simply have become a person the world had never bothered to document clearly. Rachel warned Ethan that searches like this could hurt. People imagine reunions as clean emotional rewards, but real searches uncover marriages, children, graves, resentment, and truths nobody prepared for. Ethan told her to continue. Rachel followed a lead to a woman named Lily in Oregon. Wrong person. Another to a widow in Ohio. Wrong person. Another to a hospital worker in Maine. Wrong person again. Each false lead took Ethan through a private rise and fall. He would tell himself not to hope, then hope anyway, then sit alone when the call came back empty. His board members noticed he seemed distracted. Assistants noticed he stayed later but worked less. One night, his driver found him outside the office building, staring at the sunset between two towers, as if the sky had become a clock. By then, Ethan Cole was worth more than most people could imagine, but old pain had made him feel 12 again. That was the strange cruelty of unfinished childhood grief. It waited patiently beneath achievement. It allowed a person to build, win, lead, and command. Then one letter, one name, one tree, one fading memory could undo the illusion that success had healed anything. Ethan began thinking about the old neighborhood more often. He had avoided returning because he feared what it would confirm. If Lily had forgotten him, the tree would become a grave for a promise. If Lily had died, the tree would become a monument to his delay. If Lily had waited and suffered, the tree would become evidence against him. But Rachel finally said what Ethan already knew. The records are incomplete. If you want the truth, go back to the beginning. Ethan returned on a Thursday evening in early autumn. He did not bring cameras, assistants, security, or anyone from his company. Only his driver took him, and even he was asked to wait at the end of the street. The neighborhood looked smaller, as childhood places often do when memory has spent years enlarging them. Some houses had been repainted, some porches had been rebuilt. Ethan's old home had new windows and unfamiliar curtains. The Harper house had a different fence, but between the two properties stood the oak tree. Older, wider, scarred by weather, but alive. Ethan stood across the street for several minutes before crossing. For years he had imagined this return. He had imagined running to the tree. Instead, he approached slowly, like a man entering a room where someone had been waiting too long. At first, he could not find the initials. The bark had changed and the old marks had stretched with time. Then his fingers found them, E+L, uneven, faded, still there. Ethan closed his eyes, and for one impossible second, he heard Lily's childhood voice asking him to promise. When he opened his eyes, he saw another carving beneath the initials. The letters were older than fresh wounds, but newer than the original promise. The words were careful, pressed deep into the bark by someone who had wanted them to last. I waited until the sun set. Ethan read them once, then again. His hand dropped from the tree. No courtroom verdict, no business loss, No public failure had ever struck him like that sentence. It was not accusation alone. It was testimony. An elderly woman watched him from the porch next door. Ethan noticed her only after she spoke. "I wondered if you would ever come back." Her name was Mrs. Whittaker, and she had lived on that street longer than almost anyone. Ethan remembered her vaguely as the woman who used to give children lemonade in paper cups. Now she moved slowly with a cane, but her eyes were sharp. She knew him before he introduced himself. "You're Thomas and Evelyn Cole's boy," she said. Hearing his parents' names from someone who had known them nearly broke something open in him. Ethan asked the question he had carried for decades. "Do you know what happened to Lily Harper?" Mrs. Whittaker looked toward the oak tree, then back at him, and the softness in her face told him the answer would not be simple. Mrs. Whittaker sat beside him on the grass as much as her old knees allowed. For several minutes, neither of them spoke. Ethan had received contracts worth hundreds of millions of dollars without trembling, but now his hands shook around a letter written by a young woman with no power except faith. Margaret Hale. The name was new to him, but to Mrs. Whittaker it was familiar. She remembered Margaret as an old friend of Lily's mother, someone who lived near the coast and helped the family during the move. She did not know whether Margaret was alive, but she gave Ethan the town name she remembered. Ethan thanked her, though the words felt too small. As he stood to leave, Mrs. Whittaker touched his sleeve and said, "Whatever you find, remember she was a good girl." That sentence stayed with him during the drive. She was a good girl. Ethan knew it already, but hearing it from someone else felt like being entrusted with something sacred. He called Rachel Donovan before the car reached the highway and gave her the name Margaret Hale and the coastal town. Rachel moved quickly. Within hours, she found several possible matches. By morning, she had narrowed it to one. Margaret Hale, widowed, 81 years old, living in a modest blue house not far from the water. No public connection to Lily Harper appeared in obvious records, but there were old address overlaps and one medical emergency contact from years earlier that suggested Margaret had known Lily's mother. Ethan did not wait for a formal report. By noon, he was on his way to the coast. The coastal town was the kind of place people visited for quiet, not attention. Weathered houses, small cafes, fishing boats, gulls over parking lots, and streets that seemed to lead either to the water or away from disappointment. Margaret Hale's house sat behind a short white fence with lavender growing near the path. Ethan stood at the door holding Lily's note, suddenly aware that wealth had not prepared him for this. A business meeting could be controlled, a negotiation could be planned. But an old woman opening a door with the possible answer to the deepest question of his life could not be managed. When Margaret appeared, she looked at him carefully through the screen. Ethan said his name. She did not smile. She only said, "I wondered when the past would find this house." Margaret did not invite him in immediately. She asked why he had come. Ethan showed her the note, the bracelet, and the photograph. At the sight of the bracelet, her guarded expression changed, not completely, but enough. She opened the door and led him to a small sitting room where framed pictures covered nearly every table. Ethan searched them quickly, almost desperately, looking for Lily's face in older forms. Margaret noticed and told him to sit. Her voice was not unkind, but it carried warning. "Before I tell you anything," she said, "you need to understand that Lily spent years trying to survive the kind of hurt people dismiss because it began when she was young." Ethan nodded. He wanted to defend himself, explain Victor, show the hidden letters, prove he had not chosen silence. But he knew Margaret needed to speak first. Margaret told him Lily had arrived in that town with a sick mother, a tired father, and a heart she tried to hide. She worked hard. She cared for people. She sent money when she could, She lost her father first, then her mother years later. She almost married once, but ended it before the wedding because she would not build a marriage on a half-truth. Margaret said Lily had never been dramatic about Ethan. She did not speak his name every day or live like someone frozen in childhood. She laughed, worked, grew, helped others, and carried on. But every evening, when the sun lowered over the water, Lily became quiet. Some people look at sunsets because they are beautiful, Margaret said. Lily looked at them because that was where she kept her unfinished goodbye. Ethan asked if Lily was alive. Margaret looked at him for a long moment, as if measuring whether truth would heal or harm. Then she said yes. One word, yes. Ethan closed his eyes. For nearly 30 years, he had feared a grave, a marriage record, a name lost beyond recovery. Yes did not solve everything, but it returned air to his body. Margaret told him Lily still lived in town, in a small house near the beach. She worked with a local care service and volunteered at a community centre. She was loved there, respected there, and careful with her heart there. Ethan asked if he could see her. Margaret did not answer immediately. Then she said, "She walks by the water before sunset. If you go, do not arrive like a man expecting reward. Arrive like a man asking forgiveness." Ethan went to the beach alone. He asked his driver to stay behind. The sky was beginning to soften, turning gold at the edges. People walked dogs. A child threw stones near the water. An older couple sat on a bench sharing coffee. Ethan scanned every figure with a fear he could not name. Then he saw her. Lily Harper stood near the shoreline, her coat moving slightly in the wind, her face turned toward the lowering sun. She was older, of course. Time had touched her hair, her posture, her eyes, but Ethan knew her before logic could explain how. Some people are not recognized by their features alone. They are recognized by the place they still occupy in you. Ethan took one step, then another, and the sand shifted under his shoes, like the earth itself wanted him to feel every inch of the distance. He stopped several feet behind her. For a moment, he could not speak. He had addressed boardrooms, investors, courts, committees, and crowds. He had spoken through crisis, victory, negotiation, and loss. But standing behind Lily Harper at sunset, Ethan Cole became silent again. The first word had to carry 30 years, and no word was large enough. Finally, he said her name. Lily. She turned slowly. At first, her face showed only confusion. Then recognition moved through it, like pain arriving before joy. Her lips parted, but no sound came. Ethan saw the girl from the oak tree and the woman life had made, both standing before him at once. Lily whispered, "Ethan?" He nodded, and the years between them seemed to gather in the space neither of them crossed. Lily did not run to him. Ethan had imagined many versions of this moment, but the real one was quieter and more painful. She stood still, studying his face, perhaps searching for the boy inside the man. Then she asked the question that had lived in her since childhood. "Why didn't you come back?" Ethan reached into his coat and pulled out the letters, both hers and his. His hands were trembling. He told her about Victor, about the locked car, about the torn letter, about the hidden folder, about finding her letters only after Victor died, about searching, about the tree, about the box. He spoke carefully, not asking her to forgive quickly, not asking her to erase what his absence had cost. Lily listened with tears in her eyes, and the sunset moved lower behind her. When Ethan finished, Lily looked down at the letters in his hands. She touched the edge of one envelope she had mailed as a teenager. "I thought you chose not to answer," she said. Ethan shook his head. "I thought you believed I left you." She gave a small, broken laugh that was not joy. "I did believe it sometimes. Then I hated myself for believing it." They stood there while the water moved in and out, steady as breathing. Ethan told her he was sorry, not the kind of apology meant to close a conversation, but the kind that opens every locked room. He was sorry for not finding a way sooner. Sorry for every sunset she waited alone. Sorry for becoming successful before becoming brave enough to return. Lily wiped her face and said, "I waited for a boy. I don't know this man yet." That sentence could have ended everything. Ethan understood that. But it did not end everything because it was honest, and honesty gave them a narrow bridge. Ethan did not ask her to come with him. He did not offer money, houses, solutions, or grand gestures. He asked only if he could see her again and answer anything she wanted to ask. Lily looked toward the sun, then back at him. "Tomorrow," she said, "but not at sunset." Ethan almost smiled through his tears because he understood. Sunset belonged to too much pain. Tomorrow would have to begin somewhere else. The next morning, they met at a small cafe near the harbor. Ethan arrived early, Lily arrived on time. They sat across from each other like strangers, carrying the same childhood in separate boxes. Their healing was slow. That is the part people often leave out of stories because slow healing is less dramatic than reunion. But it is more true. Lily asked difficult questions. Ethan answered them. Ethan showed her the letters he had written over the years. Lily read some and could not finish others. She told him about Aaron, the engagement she ended, her parents, the work she had done, and the life she had built without him. Ethan told her about Claire, Victor, the businesses, the loneliness, and the way the oak tree had followed him in silence. They walked in the mornings. They visited Margaret in the afternoons. They avoided easy romance at first because both of them knew childhood promises cannot simply be pasted over adult wounds. Weeks became months. Ethan extended his stay in the coastal town and began managing his companies from a distance. People in his business world speculated, but Ethan did not care. For the first time in his adult life, he was not building something to escape pain. He was staying somewhere to understand it. Lily watched him carefully. She noticed he remembered small details, just as he had when they were children. He remembered she liked tea with honey. He remembered she hated being interrupted. He remembered the yellow kitchen she had once described under the oak tree. But Lily was no longer only the girl from that memory. She was a woman who had buried parents, sacrificed years, ended an engagement, and learned to stand alone. Ethan had to love who she had become, not only who he had lost. One afternoon, Lily asked to see the old neighborhood again. Ethan was surprised. He had planned to ask her eventually, but he feared it would hurt too much. Lily said she needed to stand under the tree with the truth finally spoken. They drove together in silence for most of the trip. When they reached the street, Lily held her breath. The houses looked different, but the feeling came back quickly. Mrs. Whittaker was on her porch and cried when she saw Lily. The three of them spoke for a while, but eventually Ethan and Lily walked to the oak tree alone. The initials were still there. The sentence was still there. Lily touched the words she had carved and said, "I was so angry when I wrote this." Ethan said, "You had every right to be." Lily looked at him then, and something in her face softened. "I was angry," she said, "but I also hoped you would see it." Ethan nodded. "I did." The sun began lowering, just as it had on the day they made the promise. Ethan reached into his pocket and pulled out the bracelet from the metal box, restored but not replaced. He had not polished away every mark because he wanted its history visible. He held it out to her and said, "I cannot give you back the years. I cannot undo what Victor did. I cannot undo my own delay. But if you allow me, I will spend the rest of my life keeping the promise with the woman standing in front of me now." Lily looked at the bracelet, then at him. "Ethan," she whispered, "do not promise me like a boy." Ethan understood. He lowered the bracelet slightly and answered, Then I promise you, like a man, I will show up. I will tell the truth. I will not ask your pain to move faster than it can, and I will spend every sunset I have left proving that I came back to stay. Lily cried then, not the way she had cried as a child watching his car disappear, but the way a person cries when the heart recognizes that the story did not end where pain said it ended. She let him place the bracelet on her wrist. They stood under the oak tree until the sun went down, not because Lily was waiting alone this time, but because Ethan was finally there beside her. And for the first time in almost 30 years, sunset did not feel like abandonment. They married the following year in a small ceremony near the coast, not under chandeliers or in a room full of powerful people, but outdoors, with Margaret Hale in the front row and Mrs. Whittaker sitting beside her. Daniel Harper came too. He watched Ethan carefully at first, as older brothers do when time has not fully cleared old anger. But after the ceremony, Daniel shook Ethan's hand and said, "She waited a long time. Don't waste what's left." Ethan said he would not. Lily wore a simple dress. Ethan wore a dark suit. During their vows, neither of them pretended the story had been easy. Lily said love was not proven by waiting alone, but by returning with truth. Ethan said his life had many achievements, but none of them mattered as much as finding his way back to her. Years later, when their 2 children were old enough to understand more than fairy tales, but not yet old enough to carry adult sorrow, Ethan and Lily took them to the old oak tree. Their daughter asked why the tree mattered. Their son tried to read the carvings with his fingers. Ethan lifted him slightly so he could see the initials. Lily showed their daughter the sentence beneath them. "I waited until the sun set." The little girl frowned and asked if that was sad. Lily looked at Ethan, then at the branches above them. "It was," she said, "but not anymore." Ethan placed his hand on the tree, and Lily placed hers over his, just as she had when they were children. This time, 2 smaller hands joined theirs. In the end, Ethan Cole did not return to the oak tree because he needed to recover a childhood fantasy. He returned because some promises are not childish simply because children make them. Sometimes children speak from a place adults spend their whole lives trying to find again. A place before pride, before fear, before the world teaches people to protect themselves by pretending not to care. Ethan built an empire, but the oak tree reminded him of who he was before ambition became armor. Lily built a life of service and quiet strength, but the sunset reminded her that love can hurt deeply and still not be false. Their story was not about waiting forever in one place. It was about the courage to return, the courage to listen, and the courage to love the person time has changed. And maybe that is why this story stays with people, because everyone has an oak tree somewhere. Maybe not a real one, maybe it is a street, a photograph, a song, a letter, a promise, or a name you have not said out loud in years. Everyone has something that remembers who they were before life interrupted them. The question is not always whether the past can be restored exactly as it was. Most of the time, it cannot. The question is whether we are brave enough to face it truthfully, ask forgiveness where forgiveness is needed, and honor what was good without denying what was painful. Ethan and Lily lost almost 30 years, but when the sun finally set with them standing together, those years did not vanish. They became the road that led them back. So, if this story touched you, let us know in the comments. Do you believe a promise made in childhood can still matter after a lifetime of silence? And if there is someone in your life you never got to properly thank, forgive, or say goodbye to, maybe this is your reminder that time is not as endless as we think. Ethan waited too long because he believed success had to come before courage. Lily waited too long because she believed love had to explain itself before she could move on. But in the end, both of them learned the same truth. Some doors do not open by themselves. Someone has to return, someone has to speak, Someone has to stand beneath the old tree and say, I remember. Subscribe for more true storytelling about love, loss, family, and the secrets people carry for a lifetime.